Imagine this. You're a prince, born into unimaginable wealth and power with everything at your fingertips. But now, you find yourself facing a mountain of debt that threatens to destroy everything you've built. How did this happen? And why is your own family refusing to help? This is the shocking true story of Prince Harry's financial collapse and how the monarchy is handling the crisis. After years of being misrepresented by lies and falsehoods spun about him and his family, there eventually comes a point when you must face the truth, no matter how painful or harsh it may be. The weight of being misunderstood and maligned for so long, of watching false narratives take root and spread across the world, eventually becomes unbearable. The constant battles, the relentless mischaracterizations, the public's judgment, these things leave scars that, no matter how hard you try to ignore them, eventually demand attention. And so, after years of enduring this, there comes a reckoning. No matter how much you've suffered, how much you've kept silent, the truth can no longer be buried. The ties that bind you, especially those to your family, the very people who should be your greatest allies, have been severed. Once, those bonds might have been strong, but now, in the wake of endless betrayals, misunderstandings, and a near-constant storm of tabloid headlines, they have frayed beyond repair. The relationship between certain members of the royal family and the tabloid press, what was once a careful, delicate balance, had finally reached its breaking point. What had begun as a mere misunderstanding grew into a chasm too wide to bridge. The media, once treated with a modicum of respect and deference, had become a force that could no longer be ignored, a powerful adversary that consistently drove wedges between family members. What was once an attempt to maintain a sense of dignity and respect for tradition turned into a game of manipulation and deflection, where truth and lies were blurred beyond recognition. The facade Prince Harry had worked so tirelessly to maintain, one of calm, collected composure in the face of public scrutiny, had now shattered under the weight of a devastating revelation, one that would change everything. News broke today from London, and it wasn't just a mere headline or speculation. It was a storm of breaking reports that threatened to alter the course of everything. The truth that had been carefully guarded within the secure vaults of St. James's Palace had been ripped wide open, and with it came the shocking exposure of figures that no one had expected. A financial dossier, once sealed and hidden away, had been leaked to the public, revealing the catastrophic truth that Prince Harry had spent years desperately trying to keep hidden. What was once an open secret, what many had speculated about in hushed tones, was now laid bare for the world to see. A financial disaster of truly staggering proportions, one so vast and incomprehensible that even the most seasoned financial experts would struggle to grasp its full implications, was now exposed. The magnitude of the debt, pound 150 million, an amount equivalent to over $100 million, was more than just a number on a page. It represented an insurmountable mountain, one that hung over the Duke of Sussex like a shadow he could not escape. This was no longer just a passing headline, no longer a whisper among the tabloids. This was a verified truth, a reality that had come crashing down around him. And now, with this devastating information exposed, the question hanging in the air was one that no one could avoid. How could someone raised in unimaginable wealth, with every opportunity at their feet, fall so far? How did a prince, born into a family that possessed unimaginable power and privilege, find himself buried under the weight of such a massive, suffocating debt? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, why, after all this time, wouldn't his own family step in to help? To understand the gravity of the situation, we must first turn our attention to the man who stood at the center of the emergency summit that took place behind closed doors at St. James's Palace. The man who played a critical role in the royal family's decision-making in the face of this crisis. This was not a diplomat, not a conciliator, nor a mediator trying to mend the fractures within the family. This man was Sir Michael Stevens, the keeper of the Privy Purse, known within royal circles as the Living Ledger. He was the financial mind behind the royal family's resources, and his job was not to play to emotions or sentimentalism, but to ensure the survival of the monarchy, no matter the personal cost. Stevens was not there to seek compromise or to smooth over the differences between Harry and the rest of the family. He was there as the cold, calculating financial strategist who understood the monarchy not as a family bound by blood and tradition, but as an institution, a living, breathing entity that had to survive and thrive, regardless of the personal relationships that defined its members. To Stevens, the monarchy wasn't about warmth or familial loyalty. It was a corporation, one that demanded discipline, financial health, and long-term sustainability. Every decision, every move he made was calculated with the understanding that the survival of the institution came first, above all else. The numbers, as Stevens would soon reveal, were not just figures on a page. They were a reflection of deep financial mismanagement, a disaster that could have serious, long-lasting consequences for the royal family as a whole. This wasn't just a personal failure for Harry. It was a failure of the entire system. The financial health of the institution, Stevens argued, always took precedence, even over the welfare of individual members. If that meant severing ties with a prince who had strayed too far from the core values of the monarchy, so be it. The institution could not afford to be held hostage by one person's mistakes. Stevens' analysis of the financial situation was cold, methodical, and utterly unforgiving. There was no room for sympathy, no space for emotional considerations. His presentation to King Charles and Prince William was a forensic dissection of failure. What followed was not a comforting reassurance that things would somehow work out, but a blunt, no-nonsense examination of how a staggering amount of wealth had been lost, and how much more would be lost if action wasn't taken. "The subject, Your Majesty," Stevens reportedly began, his voice steady and clinical, "is not scandal. It is mathematics, and the numbers are unforgiving." As he opened the dossier and began laying out the details, the room fell silent. It wasn't just about Harry's debts. It was about everything that had gone wrong, from business miscalculations to the catastrophic financial decisions that led them here. The figures, the amounts, the breakdowns, each column told a story of mismanagement and flawed decision-making. Prince Harry had made choices that had put not only his own future at risk, but also the future of the entire royal family. And now, the full extent of those choices was being revealed. The room could no longer ignore the truth. There was no easy way out. The financial damage was far greater than anyone had anticipated. This wasn't just a matter of personal failure. It was a systemic issue that had ramifications far beyond one man's mistakes. It was a story of a prince who, once living within the safety and security of the royal system, had stepped outside of it, choosing to live as an independent figure. But in doing so, he had burned the bridges that once supported him, bridges that had always kept him afloat, even during the most turbulent of times. Now, those bridges were gone. The question remained: would the monarchy extend a helping hand, or would it allow Harry to face the consequences of his actions alone? What Sir Michael Stevens presented to King Charles and Prince William that fateful night was not a heartfelt plea for mercy or a desperate cry for help. No, this was something far colder and far more clinical. It was a brutal, unwavering forensic examination of financial ruin, laid bare with stark precision. There was no room for emotion, no appeal to familial ties, and no attempt at sympathy. Instead, what the royal family was confronted with was a raw dissection of failure on a scale so enormous that it seemed almost incomprehensible. Pure mathematics, the kind of hard numbers that could not be spun or denied, were presented in front of them, one by one, through columns of data, profit and loss sheets, and intricate financial spreadsheets. They weren't just looking at a pile of numbers. They were staring at the colossal, crushing aftermath of years of poor decisions, reckless ambition, and unaccountable spending. "The subject, Your Majesty," Stevens reportedly began, his voice calm but chillingly precise, "is not scandal. It is mathematics, and the numbers are unforgiving." With these words, the atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. What followed was a chilling breakdown, a meticulous examination of how $100 million evaporated into thin air, seemingly vanishing without a trace. The numbers didn't lie. They told a story of excessive living, poor judgment, and mismanagement that only a small few truly understood. The devastating truth was exposed. Harry had lived a life without the institutional structure and financial safeguards that his royal upbringing had once afforded him. The monarchy had always been a safety net, cushioning its members from the harsh realities that ordinary citizens face. But in breaking away from that structure, Harry had been left to navigate the world alone, without the resources to support his lifestyle. The result? Financial catastrophe. Stevens didn't shy away from the gravity of the situation. He opened the dossier with a steady hand, his voice unwavering as he revealed the anatomy of debt, a terrifying blueprint of how this once promising future had crumbled under the sheer weight of unsustainable choices. Harry had assumed that his financial freedom would come with no strings attached, that he could live in the lap of luxury without paying the price for it. What he didn't anticipate was how the rules of the real world would catch up with him. The lifestyle he wanted, one that was no longer supported by the crown, would require more than just a handful of lucrative deals or media contracts. It required a massive, continuous influx of cash that, in the end, didn't materialize. The dream he and Meghan had built in California, a world far removed from the royal duties and constraints of their former lives, was now on the verge of collapse. As Stevens went through the breakdown of every failed business venture, every bad investment, every legal battle that drained millions without providing any return, the room fell into a thick, oppressive silence. King Charles, who had once shielded Harry from many of the harsh realities of life, now sat with a deep, troubled expression. His face showed the weight of a father's pain, compounded by the knowledge that the decisions made in this room could change the course of Harry's life forever. Prince William, always composed but now visibly frustrated, clenched his jaw as he listened, absorbing each devastating revelation with a sense of inevitability. Princess Anne, who had insisted on attending the summit despite the hour, remained still, her face unreadable, her expression a mask of cold professionalism. She listened with the eyes of someone who had always understood the gravity of maintaining the monarchy's integrity above all else. Someone who knew that, when it came to the family business, there was no room for sentimentality. What they were witnessing in that moment wasn't just one man's financial downfall. It was the unraveling of a system that had, until now, been the backbone of the royal family's survival. This was not just Harry's crisis. It was a crisis that had ramifications for the entire institution. The monarchy, though a family in essence, was first and foremost an institution. And this institution could not afford to be dragged down by one man's inability to manage his finances. It could not afford to subsidize poor decisions or provide a safety net for someone who had so clearly chosen to operate outside its protective boundaries. The collapse wasn't just personal, it was institutional. The first blow came when Stevens pointed to the mortgage on the Montecito estate. The Sussexes still owed $14.65 million on the property they had purchased for just over $14 million in 2020. But it wasn't the amount they owed that left the room speechless. It was the terms of the loan, the hidden details buried in the fine print. The loan, Stevens explained, was likely subject to variable interest rates that had spiked dramatically following the post-pandemic economic turmoil. The original mortgage, which had seemed manageable at first, had now ballooned into a financial ticking time bomb. And that wasn't all. The property wasn't just sitting there as an asset waiting to appreciate in value. No, the mansion in Montecito, which had been symbolically purchased as a sign of independence, was bleeding money every single month. Property taxes alone exceeded $200,000 annually. Then there were the ongoing costs, the full-time staff, the security teams, the chefs, the gardeners, the cleaners. All of this required millions per year just to keep the mansion operational. The gardens, famous for providing privacy from the constant scrutiny of paparazzi, were costing six figures annually to maintain. The mansion, which once represented freedom and the promise of a fresh start, had now become a massive financial burden. The house, once a symbol of success, had become a metaphor for the Sussexes' financial folly. They were living a lifestyle that was simply unsustainable, one that required blockbuster income every year just to break even. Yet Harry hadn't had a blockbuster in years. The streaming deals that were supposed to support this new life had crumbled. Netflix had cut ties after the failure of their documentary series to meet viewership expectations. Spotify had terminated the podcast deal, with one executive publicly calling them grifters on the way out. The Montecito mansion, once a beacon of hope, now stood as a monument to mismanagement, a concrete albatross that was pulling Harry and Meghan deeper into debt, further away from the freedom they had sought. But it didn't stop there. The financial bleed continued. The vanity tax came next, a staggering $28 million in legal fees. This was the price Harry had paid for his obsession with litigation, his desire to fight every perceived injustice in the courts. The audit revealed how nearly $28 million had been spent on legal battles across multiple jurisdictions, money spent not to build assets or create wealth, but to fuel a seemingly endless series of lawsuits. Lawsuits that, more often than not, failed to deliver the victories Harry so desperately sought. Stevens walked through each case in painstaking detail, outlining how money had been spent fighting for causes that ultimately proved futile. He pointed to the failed RAVC case, in which Harry had sued for taxpayer-funded police protection after stepping back from royal duties. Not only did he lose the case, but he was also ordered to pay substantial legal costs to the opposing side. Millions of dollars had been flushed down the drain, handed over to the very government he had sought to sue. The money, which had once been used to safeguard his family, had been spent on a fight that had no real outcome, except the destruction of his finances. This, Stevens explained, is what we call burning capital to buy silence. But silence was never achieved. Instead, the court transcripts became public record, and the testimony was weaponized by critics. The money that had been spent, millions of dollars, had achieved nothing but further damage to Harry's reputation. Stevens continued, methodically laying out other costly lawsuits that had dragged on for years, devouring legal fees from both ends, and only drawing more public attention to the very things Harry had hoped to suppress. Every legal battle had created more headlines, more scrutiny, more public humiliation. In the end, Stevens made it clear that Harry's approach to litigation had been fundamentally flawed. He had fought these battles not for strategic gain or financial profit, but for emotional vindication. What Harry truly sought was validation that he was right, that the world was wrong, and that the royal family had been wrong. But no courtroom could provide that. No legal victory could erase the pain and the wounds that had been inflicted over the years. What Harry wanted was something intangible: acceptance, recognition, and a sense of justice. But as Stevens so clinically pointed out, no judge could grant him that. The truly devastating revelation came when Stevens revealed that much of this legal warfare had been financed through loans and credit lines extended under the assumption that the royal family would ultimately step in to cover any shortfalls. The lenders believed, incorrectly, that King Charles would never allow his son to default on these obligations. They had trusted the family name, the power of the monarchy, to act as a safety net. But Stevens made it clear those assumptions were no longer valid. This, Stevens explained, his voice cutting through the tense silence, is what we call burning capital to buy silence. His words reverberated through the room, heavy with the weight of their meaning. But the silence Harry had hoped for was never achieved. Instead, it had all backfired. The court transcripts, once kept behind closed doors, had been exposed to the public. The testimony that Harry had assumed would protect his privacy had, in fact, become ammunition for his critics. The money that had been poured into these legal battles, millions in billable hours, had simply vanished into thin air, offering no tangible results, no legal victories, no peace. In the years that followed, there were also high-profile defamation suits against British newspapers, each one dragging on endlessly, each one consuming vast amounts of legal fees. Rather than providing the privacy or protection that Harry and Meghan sought, these lawsuits only generated more headlines. Headlines that relentlessly chipped away at their public image, furthering the very narrative they were fighting against. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The privacy lawsuits, which were supposed to shield them from the invasive scrutiny of the media, only served to draw more attention to their personal lives. It was as if every attempt to push back was met with an even greater public spotlight. Harry's approach to litigation, Stevens continued, his tone unwavering, was fundamentally flawed. The cold reality hit home. Harry wasn't approaching these lawsuits as strategic business decisions, nor was he fighting for financial compensation or practical resolution. He was seeking something else, something far more intangible and ultimately unattainable. What he truly wanted wasn't justice in a legal sense. It wasn't compensation for his grievances. No, what Harry was after was validation. He wanted to prove to the world and perhaps to himself that he was right all along, that the royal family had wronged him, that his departure was justified, and that the world would eventually see it his way. But no matter how many cases he won or lost, no ruling from a judge could grant him that. The courts could offer him a verdict, but they could not give him the emotional vindication he sought. The legal battles had become less about practical outcomes and more about an emotional quest for recognition, and in doing so, they drained him, financially, mentally, and emotionally. No amount of legal victories could replace the fundamental need for acceptance and approval from the very institution he had once called home. The truly devastating revelation came when Stevens disclosed just how much of this costly legal warfare had been financed through loans and credit lines, borrowed money, extended on the assumption that the royal family, in its infinite resources and power, would step in to cover any shortfalls. These loans were based on the belief, completely misguided as it turned out, that King Charles would never allow his son to face the harsh consequences of defaulting on his obligations. But Stevens made it clear with brutal honesty that those assumptions had been wrong. The royal family's safety net, the one Harry had relied on for so long, was no longer available to him. The assumption that the monarchy would always bail him out was now nothing more than a dangerous, unrealistic fantasy. This was only the beginning of the financial catastrophe. As Stevens continued to present the details of Harry's spiraling debts, he introduced the next revelation: the paranoia premium. The term referred to the astronomical costs of private security, costs that had spiraled out of control since Harry lost his access to metropolitan police protection upon stepping down from his royal duties. The numbers were staggering. Over $31 million had been spent on private security over the past 5 years. To put that in perspective, $31 million was more than most heads of state, let alone A-list celebrities, would consider necessary for their own protection. The security costs were far beyond what any normal private citizen, even someone in the public eye, would need to spend. But this wasn't just about protection. This was the construction of a fortress around Harry and his family, one that resembled the kind of security detail you might expect for a head of state under active threat, not a former royal living in one of the safest, most exclusive neighborhoods in the world. Multiple armed guards, rotating shifts, armored vehicles, counter-surveillance technology, and travel security for every movement outside of Montecito. It was a complex and costly operation, one that seemed more suited to someone facing constant danger from international threats, not a public figure who had left behind the safety of his royal duties. Stevens delivered a brutal but necessary assessment of the situation. Harry is paying for presidential-level security on a podcaster's budget. The pressure was mounting in every direction. Harry's genuine fears for the safety of his family were legitimate. He had been through real trauma, real danger. But those fears had been amplified by his departure from the royal family, by the loss of the institutional protection that had once been his shield. The longer his financial situation remained unstable, the more his paranoia grew, and the more he spent to protect himself. It was a vicious cycle, fears driving higher security costs, and those rising costs creating greater financial strain, which then led to more public media deals and projects, each one further depleting his already fragile resources. Stevens concluded with the undeniable truth: the entire business model is structurally unsustainable. Prince Harry wasn't just temporarily broke, he was operating a financial enterprise that lost money every single day. His spending habits, the ill-fated ventures, and the inability to generate sustainable income were all contributing to a situation that was beyond repair. The financial collapse wasn't just a result of one or two bad decisions. It was the culmination of years of poor financial planning, misguided ambitions, and a refusal to accept the reality of his new life outside the royal system. And then came the disastrous streaming venture. Netflix had promised a massive deal, one worth over $100 million for multiple projects, including documentaries, docuseries, feature films, and even children's programming. It was supposed to be the vehicle that established Harry and Meghan as prominent content creators, entrepreneurs in their own right, with the kind of media power and influence that matched the Obamas' own deal with Netflix. But that vision never came to fruition. The documentary series they produced, while initially driven by curiosity and controversy, quickly lost its momentum. Viewership dropped sharply, and with it, the hopes of turning this deal into a financial windfall. The criticism that followed was fierce: accusations of tone deafness, self-indulgence, and an utter lack of universal appeal. What was supposed to be the foundation of Harry and Meghan's financial independence post-royalty turned into a cautionary tale. The initial wave of curiosity-driven viewership had dried up, and subsequent episodes saw even steeper declines in audience numbers. Promised follow-up projects stalled in development hell. Concepts were pitched but rejected, scripts were commissioned but never brought to life. The deal, once touted as a major career milestone, ended up becoming a financial albatross, far less lucrative than anyone had hoped, and far more costly than anyone had anticipated. Financial analysts now believe that the Sussexes likely received only a fraction of the promised $100 million, with estimates ranging from $25 to $30 million, much of which was swallowed up by production costs, overheads, and staff salaries. The streaming deals, intended to provide financial freedom, had collapsed spectacularly, leaving behind nothing but a gaping void. The collapse of these deals not only left Harry and Meghan financially exposed, but also shattered the illusion that they could sustain themselves without the royal institution behind them. Their brand, their life-ist, and their future were now in jeopardy. And what Stevens had laid bare was more than just a financial crisis. It was the result of a deep, systemic failure to recognize the limits of their independence, the very real consequences of living outside the royal structure that had once supported them. Spotify's deal proved to be no different from the disastrous streaming venture with Netflix. What began with high hopes and promises quickly unraveled. After producing only 12 episodes of Meghan's highly anticipated podcast, Archetypes, Spotify made the fateful decision to terminate the partnership. The sting of public humiliation was sharp and painful, especially when a Spotify executive publicly referred to Harry and Meghan as grifters in a scathing comment made during a podcast. It was a bitter blow to the Sussexes, who had poured their efforts into what they had hoped would be a key pillar of their financial independence. What had been intended as a breakthrough, an opportunity to carve out their place in the media world, had instead become a defining failure. The streaming deals, once seen as the foundation of their post-royal life, had collapsed under the weight of underperformance. Rather than offering the security they had hoped for, these projects had drained their resources, leaving a gaping financial hole in their business model. The plans to create content that would secure their future had turned into an abyss, one that seemed to pull everything they had worked for into its depths, erasing their hopes for lasting independence. As the financial crisis unfolded, so too did the monumental family confrontation. It wasn't in the comfortable surroundings of Clarence House, the usual setting for royal family meetings, but in the austere, time-worn oak room at St. James's Palace. This was the heart of royal administration, where the most critical decisions in the monarchy's history had been made for centuries. And now, it was where the future of one of its members would be decided. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and the atmosphere was thick with tension and a sense of finality, much like the infamous Sandringham Summit of 2020. But this time, the consequences were far more immediate, and the emotional weight was more than just a familial dispute. It was a matter of survival for the monarchy itself. Sitting around the ancient mahogany table were the key players in this crucial discussion. King Charles III, the reigning monarch, his son Prince William, his daughter Princess Anne, and Sir Michael Stevens, the keeper of the Privy Purse. Each one was grappling with the heavy burden of the decision at hand. King Charles, torn between his fatherly love for his son and his duty to the monarchy, spoke first. His voice, usually calm and composed, carried a depth of emotion and concern that was unmistakable. Despite the years of training to keep personal feelings out of royal matters, the king could not ignore the emotional toll this situation had taken on him. "We cannot have a son of the king appearing in American bankruptcy court," Charles said, his voice thick with concern and a hint of despair. The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. "It creates a spectacle we cannot control. It tarnishes the monarchy. It makes us look cruel and vindictive for letting him fall so far." There was no denying the gravity of his words. To have Harry, once the golden child, beloved by millions, now facing the humiliation of bankruptcy in a foreign land would be an irreparable blow to the royal family's image. The monarchy, built on centuries of tradition and unwavering stability, could not afford such a scandal. It would diminish everything the royal family had stood for, casting a shadow over the institution that could take years to recover from. Charles, still wrestling with the emotions of being both a father and a king, offered a potential solution, a private settlement, one that would allow them to help Harry while maintaining the dignity of the monarchy. "I want to help him," Charles pleaded, his gaze moving around the table seeking understanding. "We can silence the creditors, avoid a catastrophe, and buy him time to restructure his finances. We can help him once more." His proposal was to offer Harry a substantial loan from his personal wealth to cover the most urgent debts. However, this would be structured as a loan, not a gift, with terms for repayment. It would be kept confidential to avoid the public spectacle of a royal bankruptcy. But before Charles's proposal could even fully take shape, the mood in the room shifted dramatically. Prince William, who had remained silent up until that point, now spoke, and his words struck like a thunderclap in the quiet room. His argument was sharp, measured, and devastating. William didn't look at his father, who was struggling with the weight of the decision. Instead, his eyes were fixed on the numbers, on the cold, hard reality of what was unfolding. There was no room for sentimentality in his mind, no space for the emotional pull of family ties. This was not about saving Harry, it was about the survival of the monarchy itself. William, whose role in the future of the royal family had become more apparent in recent years, was now forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that bailing Harry out would come at an unimaginable cost. "This is not about saving Harry," William stated, his voice calm yet firm, cutting through the tension in the room. "This is about preventing us from funding our own destruction." The harshness of his words sent a ripple through the room. William wasn't simply speaking about one man's crisis. He was speaking about the very survival of the royal institution. His voice was measured, but the urgency behind his words was unmistakable. "We cannot afford to let this continue. If we bail him out, we are not just saving him, we are enabling a behavior that will come back to haunt us. We need to face an uncomfortable reality." William's words were like a wake-up call, a sobering dose of truth that no one could ignore. "Harry is no longer just a private citizen living his life in California," he continued, his tone deliberate. "He is a media content producer, and his primary product is us. His business model relies on us being the villains in his narrative. If we step in and save him now, that entire victim narrative collapses." The room fell into a heavy silence as William laid bare the key contradiction that made any bailout futile. The media, which paid Harry for his content, thrived on his victimhood, on the portrayal of the royal family as the antagonists. If we step in and save him now, William argued, we collapse the very business model that he's built. He will be contractually and financially incentivized to manufacture a new grievance, to find a new way to paint us as the villains to keep his content pipeline flowing. William's argument was ruthless, but it was grounded in undeniable truth. He pulled up specific examples to back up his case. Look at the Oprah interview, he said, referencing the explosive moment when Harry and Meghan aired their grievances with the family. We had already tried to accommodate their concerns privately, but it didn't stop them from pushing out more accusations. Look at the Netflix documentary. It dropped new accusations even after we tried to reconcile. And then came the memoir Spare, which broke confidences just when we were trying to rebuild our relationships. The severity of William's words hung in the air as he pressed on. Every time we extend compassion, it gets weaponized. Every private conversation becomes a chapter in the next book. Every financial lifeline becomes more breathing room to plan the next media attack. It never ends. He then reminded everyone of the critical role he now played as the Duke of Cornwall. The Duchy of Cornwall, with its substantial funds, had historically been used to support family members, including Harry. Not a single pound of duchy money will cross the Atlantic to subsidize a lifestyle built on attacking the very institution that generated that wealth, William declared with finality. That's not cruelty. That's basic fiduciary responsibility. His words were hard to swallow, but William made it clear that this was not about familial loyalty or emotional connection. It was about protecting the future of the monarchy. If we bail him out now, we are just postponing the inevitable, William warned. In 2 years, we'll be back in this room facing an even larger debt with even fewer options. He hasn't just burned the bridges between us. He's built toll booths on those bridges, charging admission to anyone who wants to watch them burn. The starkness of his argument was undeniable. William wasn't just speaking out of frustration or anger. He was outlining the cold, hard truth of the situation. Every time we try to rebuild, he lights another fire. The flames generate more revenue than reconciliation ever could. As the room absorbed William's words, they could no longer ignore the reality he had presented. Princess Anne, who had been listening intently, now spoke up in agreement. Known for her pragmatic, no-nonsense approach, Anne's words were just as decisive as William's. So, what's next for Prince Harry? Will the royal family intervene, or will they let him face the consequences of his choices alone? What will the future of the monarchy look like in the wake of this catastrophic financial collapse? If you're as shocked by this story as we are, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that you want more inside scoops on royal drama. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because we'll be tracking every new development as this story unfolds. This isn't just about a prince falling from grace. It's about the survival of a centuries-old institution. The Bank of Prince Harry is officially closed, and the true cost of freedom is becoming clearer by the day. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think should happen next? Is it time for Harry to face the music, or should the monarchy step in and save him from himself? Remember, in the royal world, nothing is ever as it seems, and behind closed doors, decisions are being made that will affect generations to come. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Subscribe now, and let's dive deeper into the stories they don't want you to hear.